Bem, já começaremos. Um minutinho para a gente encerrar o dia com chave de ouro. Vem cá.
Okay. So I want to use them to ensure that you don't fall asleep while waiting. So can you all stand up? Please stand up. Please stand up. I'm not Eminem, but please stand up. Put your bags down. Okay? So please stand up and just do what I do. Okay?
Você quer que eu venha mais perto?
Now we breathe. Can you hold it? Okay, now we breathe. We breathe in and you breathe out. You breathe in, you breathe out. Is the minister there? A warm welcome to Minister Silva.
I'm pleased to welcome you back to our last plenary session, and I'm honored to invite to the stage our Minister Marina Silva of the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. Welcome, Minister. Tenho o prazer de fazê-los bem-vindos para a nossa última sessão plenária deste primeiro dia. E não foi maravilhoso? Eu me sinto inspirada e motivada. E nós esperamos que assim também vocês estejam. E para coroar este dia, neste plenário tão relevante, nós temos então conosco a ministra Marina Silva, do Ministério do Meio Ambiente e Mudança do Clima, que agora nos fala. Ministra, a palavra está contigo. Tu queres falar daí ou queres vir aqui? A ministra, então, está com a palavra.
Obrigada. Boa noite a todos, a todas. Primeiro, eu quero agradecer a Deus por estarmos aqui. Quero cumprimentar a todos os meus colegas que fazem parte desse painel. Agradecer aos organizadores pela honra do convite para participar desse importante fórum e de pensar como vamos tratar as questões desafiadoras que estão diante de nós, numa perspectiva de mudança de visão de mundo, mas uma mudança de visão de mundo que seja acompanhada da necessária ação que diga que, de fato, aquilo que nós pensamos, dizemos, sentimos, é traduzido em uma ação real, né? Que dá os verdadeiros frutos. Quando me foi feito o convite, hoje pela manhã eu estive no Rio de Janeiro participando do G20 Social e estou aqui agora no Fórum Interreligioso do G20. Pensar o bem-estar holístico em um mundo em turbilhão. Eu gostei muito desse paradoxo, né? Pensar algo que nos leva para uma perspectiva de integração e conectividade com a natureza, com a gente mesmo e com as outras pessoas, enfim, mas num mundo em turbilhões. E talvez fosse interessante a gente pensar muito rapidamente que turbilhões seriam esses. Esse mundo em turbilhão tem muitas formas desses turbilhões se realizarem, mas eu escolhi aqui alguns poucos só para ilustrar. Um dos grandes turbilhões que nós vivemos é a falta de harmonia que temos com a gente mesmo e com a natureza, e a insuficiência das normas e das regras que fazem com que a gente possa se relacionar uns com os outros, com a sociedade, com o Estado. Tudo isso é motivo de desarmonia. Mas, com certeza, entre esses turbilhões, tem o problema da pobreza. Nós temos bilhões de pessoas que vivem em situação de muita vulnerabilidade no mundo todo. Uma vulnerabilidade que cada dia é agravada por N fatores, e um deles é o da mudança climática, dos eventos climáticos extremos que estão destruindo os sistemas alimentares, estão empobrecendo e destruindo as áreas terrestres nas quais cultivamos os nossos alimentos. Aqui no Brasil, nós vivemos uma experiência muito difícil de mudança do clima e de eventos climáticos extremos. Tivemos uma grande enchente num dos nossos estados aqui, o Rio Grande do Sul. Foi preciso fazer o salvamento de 80 mil pessoas, cerca de 2 milhões de pessoas foram atingidas com essas chuvas. E, nesse momento, nós temos uma situação muito grave no Pantanal, que é um bioma do Brasil, uma das maiores áreas alagadas do mundo, que está sob a ameaça das mudanças climáticas, sua biodiversidade, suas populações originárias. Temos agora uma escassez hídrica severa nessa área, que é uma área alagada, com uma grande quantidade de animais. E, nesse momento, nós temos ali uma situação que chega a ter umidade de 12%, a umidade relativa do ar, com ventos que vão de 30 a 70 quilômetros por hora, com temperaturas altíssimas e milhares e milhares e milhares de focos de calor. Só para se ter uma ideia, temos uma quantidade enorme de pessoas fazendo combate ao fogo e equipamentos, mas isso já é efeito das mudanças climáticas. E isso agrava as situações de vulnerabilidade. A mesma coisa nós estamos enfrentando na Amazônia. Temos uma imensa seca que intercala entre um período de chuvas fora de controle e, em seguida, uma estiagem muito grande. Temos um dos estados que está já vivendo essa escassez, com municípios alagados, aliás, isolados, e uma situação de penúria pela grande quantidade de mortandade de peixe, a baixa de estoque de alimentos. A população da Amazônia, a maior parte da proteína que elas ingerem vem da pesca, e a grande mortandade de peixes em função da baixa dos rios, o aumento da temperatura dos rios, está levando a uma situação de escassez. Então, a questão da pobreza é um problema agravado pela mudança do clima. Eu citei aqui alguns exemplos. A questão da destruição. Nós temos um processo de destruição que faz com que alguns cientistas digam que isso não é novidade aqui nesse fórum. Nós já estamos com cerca de 30% do planeta no vermelho. No caso da floresta amazônica, por exemplo, aqui no Brasil, os cientistas dizem que, se ultrapassarmos a 25% de destruição da floresta, ela entra num processo de savanização. Hoje, nós já temos uma perda de cobertura florestal na Amazônia em torno de 19% a 20%. E não pode ultrapassar os 25% para que não entre em ponto de não retorno. Isso é um prejuízo para o equilíbrio do planeta, mas também do nosso país e da nossa região. Só para se ter uma ideia, a Amazônia é responsável por cerca de 75% do PIB da América do Sul. 75% do PIB da América do Sul depende das chuvas que são produzidas pela floresta amazônica, que é algo em torno de 20 bilhões de toneladas de água por dia, que é transformada em vapor e lançada na atmosfera. Uma parte disso vai para os oceanos, que é fundamental, a outra parte cai sobre a própria floresta e se transforma nos rios voadores. A destruição da floresta seria transformar a maior parte do nosso país em desertos como Saara e Atacama. Então, vivemos o turbilhão da destruição dos recursos naturais, dos serviços ecossistêmicos de um modo geral. E a conclusão que eu chego é que nós estamos gastando tempo e dinheiro naquilo que não é pão, como diz um dos ensinamentos da minha tradição religiosa, com todo respeito aqui e agradecendo por essa possibilidade de um diálogo interreligioso, a gente possa estabelecer esses pontos de conectividade entre nós. Bem, um dos outros turbilhões que nós vivemos é o da visão que dá sustentação ao que levou à crise do planeta. Nós já temos um ensaio, acho que o primeiro ensaio sobre mudança do clima foi escrito em 1896 pelo físico Svante Arrhenius. E lá ele já dizia que nós poderíamos chegar onde chegamos. Mas nós fomos para Rio 92, após o relatório Nosso Futuro Comum, e ali estabelecemos que precisávamos resolver o problema da desertificação que assola a África e vários países do mundo, inclusive o Brasil, no semiárido brasileiro. Nós precisávamos resolver o problema da perda de biodiversidade e precisávamos enfrentar aquilo que leva à mudança do clima. E o que leva à mudança do clima é desmatamento, é o uso de carvão, é o uso de petróleo, é o uso de gás. É isso que leva à mudança do clima. E, infelizmente, tivemos que ficar durante 31 anos para chegarmos agora nos Emirados Árabes Unidos e ser tomada a decisão de que é preciso fazer a transição para o fim do uso de combustível fóssil. A humanidade tem um dever de casa a ser feito. E esse dever de casa nos remete para essa ideia, né, de termos uma visão que não seja linear, né, para uma visão mais cíclica de paradigmas e de integração, né, das nossas ações. E eu só consigo imaginar isso pensando o que seria essa mudança mesmo de visão. Acho que a gente vive num ideal que fomos capturados, não nós individualmente, aqui acho que cada um tem um estilo de vida que já é bastante integrado, mas o sistema no qual nós estamos dentro e fazemos parte, queiramos ou não, ele é avassalador. E ele parte de uma visão, de uma forma de ser e de estar no mundo, que é a visão que nos leva para o ideal do ter. E essa visão do ideal do ter está fazendo com que a gente destrua as bases naturais da nossa existência. Estamos destruindo e arriscando não só a nossa vida, mas estamos destruindo as condições em que a vida nos foi dada, como disse a filósofa Hannah Arendt. Então, e eu só consigo entender que é preciso a gente fazer um deslocamento para o ideal do ser, porque se há limites para ter, não há limites para ser. E talvez seja nesse lugar que a gente consiga uma visão mais holística, os povos indígenas, as comunidades tradicionais, as comunidades tradicionais do mundo inteiro, em todos os lugares, nos ensinam como ter uma relação de respeito com a natureza, mesmo quando essa natureza, obviamente, é transformada para assegurar o nosso sustento. A gente vive numa lógica dos limites extensivos, né? Estamos nos espaços extensivos, nós estamos disputando coisas, estamos disputando minério, estamos disputando terra, estamos disputando madeira, estamos disputando petróleo, estamos disputando essas coisas. Isso são os limites extensivos. E o planeta é limitado, extensivamente falando. Mas talvez a gente tenha que ir para os limites intensivos. Se nos limites extensivos a gente está disputando coisa, nos limites intensivos nós vamos disputar as nossas habilidades. E, obviamente, que isso é bem menos ofensivo das condições que promovem e sustentam a vida. Porque se há limites para ter, não há limites para ser. Não há limites para fazer a melhor poesia, para compor as melhores canções, não há limites para fazer a melhor jogada de futebol, não há limites para escrever o melhor livro. Não há limites para ser um bom escritor, um bom poeta, enfim, uma pessoa que se dedica à sua fé. Então, isso é uma mudança muito significativa. E se temos mudanças na nossa percepção, isso tem que nos levar para algo que seja no sentido de transformar aquilo que compreendemos numa prática, numa atitude. Porque eu li certa vez um artigo de um escritor muito famoso da África, que me tocou muito. O Miyakoto, ele fala que se a gente quer fazer qualquer coisa, mudar qualquer coisa, a gente tem que se livrar dos 7 sapatos sujos. E um dos sapatos sujos que ele diz que a gente tem que se livrar é o sapato sujo de achar que porque nós estamos dizendo, nós estamos concordando, nós já estamos fazendo. A realidade não muda se a gente está concordando, se a gente está dizendo. A realidade muda quando a gente transforma o que a gente diz e o que a gente concorda em ação prática. E, infelizmente, a humanidade encontrou um caminho, muitas vezes, de não fazer concordando. Se você quer não fazer, cria um consenso. Todos já estamos de acordo que precisa resolver o problema de combustível fóssil, mas ninguém faz o dever de casa. Então, é preciso a gente se livrar desse sapato sujo, como diz o Miyakoto. E, pensando essa ideia, né, há 20 anos atrás, quando fui ministra pela primeira vez, eu disse para a minha equipe, nós vamos ter que liderar pelo exemplo. Existem muitas pessoas que, de uma forma muito eloquente e muito necessária, estão dizendo e formulando ideias e propostas muito relevantes. Nosso papel é transformar isso em prática. E aí nós começamos, né, nessa ideia de liderar pelo exemplo, fizemos um plano de prevenção e controle do desmatamento da Amazônia em 2004. Esse plano foi responsável por evitar lançar na atmosfera 5 bilhões de toneladas de CO2 de 2004 a 2012. Isso foi a maior contribuição já dada por um país individualmente desde o protocolo de Kyoto. Reduzimos durante uma década o desmatamento em 83% e criamos 25 milhões de hectares de unidades de conservação. Isso equivaleu, naquele período, a 80% das áreas protegidas que foram criadas no mundo. Agora, nós, depois de um período, né, de mais de 15 anos, eu retornei com o presidente Lula e o plano de combate ao desmatamento havia sido abandonado, o desmatamento estava fora de controle, emissões de CO2 crescendo muito. E nós conseguimos, já no primeiro ano, em 2023, uma redução do desmatamento, retomamos o plano, uma redução do desmatamento em 50%, evitando lançar na atmosfera 250 milhões de toneladas de CO2, e esse ano, nos primeiros 6 meses, já conseguimos uma redução de 45,7%, evitando lançar na atmosfera 180 milhões de toneladas de CO2. Eu digo isso para que a gente possa se animar, porque se muda o nosso entendimento, a gente tem que mudar a nossa prática e o esforço de que possamos liderar pelo exemplo. Mas eu sei que muita gente diz, não, tudo bem, a senhora está no governo, então é possível fazer isso. E nós que não estamos? As pessoas fazem muitas coisas, porque o que os governos fazem nada mais é do que um reflexo de suas sociedades, em todos os níveis. Não existe nada grandioso que se faça sozinho para as pessoas, você faz com as pessoas. Então, Um outro exemplo que eu acho que é importante a gente trabalhar é a gente superar a ideia de que basta, no caso da mudança do clima, a gente mitigar e adaptar. É preciso mitigar, reduzir a emissão de CO2. Para que isso aconteça, reduzir emissão por uso de combustível fóssil, desmatamento e outras fontes. Mas por fazermos também um esforço muito grande para triplicar a energia renovável, como saiu da COP28, dobrar, não é, a eficiência energética e um ponto, fazer a transição para o fim do uso de combustível fóssil. Talvez esse tenha sido o maior ganho que já se teve. Nós vamos para a COP29, no Azerbaijão, e ali nós temos que ter os meios de implementação, porque países pobres, países em desenvolvimento, que emitiram menos e que têm desafios enormes de pobreza, eles têm que ser ajudados pelos países ricos que emitiram mais e que têm recursos tecnológicos e recursos financeiros. É preciso os meios de implementação. A COP15 estabeleceu que era 100 bilhões. Isso é insuficiente. E eu vou dar um dado. Tem um relatório que foi feito a pedido do Reino Unido, pelo indiano Dasgupta, e ele diz que, enquanto a humanidade não consegue os 100 bilhões para fazer a transição ecológica no planeta, nós continuamos investindo, sobretudo em combustível fóssil, algo em torno de 4 a 6 trilhões de dólares. É uma luta díspare, não tem como a gente ganhar dessa forma. Então, nós vamos ter que alocar recursos, seja do poder público, seja da iniciativa privada. Então, fazer essa mudança, duplicar a eficiência energética, triplicar a energia renovável e fazer a redução drástica do uso de combustível fóssil. Aqui no Brasil, o nosso maior vetor de emissão é desmatamento. 53% das emissões do Brasil é desmatamento. E o nosso compromisso é de zerar desmatamento até 2030. Para isso, nós fizemos um plano de transformação ecológica, que é a base dos investimentos que estamos fazendo para fazer as mudanças nessa direção aqui. Obviamente que isso não é algo fácil, existem contradições dentro do governo, o sistema é contraditório, mas eu espero, né, que a pulsão de vida seja mais forte do que a pulsão de morte e a gente possa ter uma mudança. Tudo isso, se a gente conseguir, né, fazer também com que se tenha outros mecanismos além dos 100 bilhões, que é um mecanismo para pagamento por serviços ecossistêmicos, preservação de florestas dos países tropicais. É preciso que a floresta seja remunerada pelos serviços ecossistêmicos que ela presta, não no sentido mercadológico, mas para que os povos que a preservaram possam viver com dignidade. E também, por último, que a gente possa trabalhar na direção, e o Brasil está fazendo isso no G20, e vamos fazer na COP30. Na COP30, o que nós queremos é que se tenha NDCs, compromisso, as contribuições que são determinadas de redução de CO2 por cada país, o suficientemente robustas para não permitir que a gente ultrapasse 1,5 de temperatura. Para isso, vamos ter que fazer um esforço onde países ricos lideram essa corrida, países de renda média alta, como é o caso do Brasil, vêm em seguida, e países de renda baixa e países de renda média baixa terão a necessária ajuda para poder fazer a sua transição, e que seja uma transição justa. O que seria uma transição justa? É que aqueles que emitiram menos, aqueles que têm mais desafios em termos econômicos e sociais, possam receber o devido apoio e até mesmo aquilo que nós chamamos de reparação por perdas e danos, como saiu da última COP. Aqui nós trabalhamos sempre com a ideia de que é possível ter um modelo sustentável de desenvolvimento, não só do ponto de vista econômico, ambiental, mas também social, também do ponto de vista político, econômico, e também do ponto de vista ético, estético. O que a gente busca é a prosperidade. Nós transformamos natureza em dinheiro. Chegou a hora de usar esse dinheiro para restaurar e preservar natureza. Por isso que no G20 nós propusemos aqui que seja feita a taxação de pessoas super ricas, para que, tirando 2% dessas fortunas, a gente possa ter algo em torno de 500 bilhões de dólares para investir em combate às desigualdades e fazer a transição climática. Obrigada.
Muito obrigada, ministra. Certamente vamos ponderar nas tuas palavras e principalmente no chamado, né? E, nessa observação de que a concordância precisa ultrapassar e transpor a armadilha, né, de causar a inação, a falta de ação. So we thank the minister for her wise words, and we'll certainly not only ponder on it, but we were called to act. And now I would like to introduce Kushwan Singh, that was so beautifully helping us to breathe after this good and long day. And he's the head of Secretariat at the International Partnership on Religion and Sustainable Development, PARD, chefe do Secretariado da Parceria Internacional sobre Religião e Desenvolvimento Sustentável, PARD. Ele, então, vai moderar essa última sessão plenária e eu passo, então, a condução dos trabalhos a ele. Mas antes, ministra, será um prazer te ter aqui conosco, mas se precisares sair, nós entendemos e já somos muito gratos. So we thank the minister to be here with us, but if she needs to leave, we'll understand.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay. Can you please...
Yes.
We want to see the next slide. A warm welcome to this last session, and we are very grateful that you were able to listen to Minister Silva, and I was really very inspired that she was referring to the very topic we will talk about, circularity. She talked about moving from taking to being. So a lot of things she discussed we will touch upon. There's not so much time left. And I hope that our guests who are joining virtually can hear us. Dilmon and Alisa, can you hear us well? Alisa and Dilmon, can you hear us? Okay, I hope we can solve the technical problem, and we will start with our session. And let me start with the introduction of fascinating colleagues. And Alisa is in Indonesia, Alisa Wahed. She's a family psychologist, and she's the national director of the Gusdurian Network. And this network is named after her late father, the former Indonesian president. And at Nadatul Ulama, which is the one of the biggest faith-based organizations on the planet with over 50 million Muslim members, she serves as the first female co-chair in the executive board. Dilmon Singh, he is in Australia. He has an educational background in information technology, but he has been working with young people on topics such as holistic well-being, and he's a very good teacher when it comes to transmitting values to young people, and he's voluntarily working in the Sikh Council and with Sikh teachings. To my right, my friend Mindahi Bastida. He's the chief of the Grand Council of the Eagle and the Condor, and he was also the director of the Regional Nations Program of the Fountain, and he has served also as a delegate to various commissions and summits on the indigenous rights and issues of sustainability. To my left, Venerable Monk Napan from Thailand. He's the head of the Institute of Buddhist Management and Peace Foundation. And he also founded the For Beautiful Life group in 2001 and was the chair until 2015. So, I hope that Alisa and Dilman can hear us now. Yes? Yes, he is with us. Okay, but Alisa, she is not here. Yes. Okay, great. So let me briefly bring into the topic those who enjoyed the opening session in the morning, listened already to a couple of figures which are actually quite shocking. And also Minister Silva mentioned several facts that cannot be denied, that should alarm us in terms of the condition of our planet. And that's why we said this world is in turmoil, because half of the world's wealth is held by the richest 1%, and 1.1 billion people, nearly 20% of the world population, live in poverty in around 110 countries. There are far over 100 armed conflicts at this moment, and we have more than 100 million refugees worldwide. I have also referred in the morning to the latest Sustainable Development Report, which tells us that we are really off track. Only 16% of the SDG targets are going to be met as of now. So, against this backdrop, this session offers space for often neglected perspectives from indigenous, spiritual, and religious traditions, and our esteemed panelists will share alternative ideas of measuring development and prosperity that are based on the well-being of nature, humans, and animals. And at the end of the session, they will give a concrete recommendation for the post-2030 agenda, because we already know that we will not reach the SDGs, and also they will give recommendations in the context of the G20 discussions. Let me start with a very actually simple observation, and we already discussed it in our pre-talks. Nature is based on cycles. So if you look at seasons, if you look at how a leaf falls down and what happens then with the leaf, it's all about transformation. So we humans are part of these cyclic transformational processes, and the minister has also referred to it. So actually, it ought to be actually very natural that all our education, all our worldviews are based on a cyclic worldview. But in fact, linear models are dominating. Not only today, but since the time of Aristotle, they have been becoming very popular. Also, the sustainability discourse seems to be dominated by linear thinking. The SDGs do not refer once to a much needed paradigm shift from linear growth to a worldview which is based on transformational values which move us towards cyclic thinking. Even if you see okay, great. Even if you have a look at SDG 3, which is focusing on health, and even if you have a look at the sub-indicators, there's no reference to a paradigm shift that is really needed. A colleague in the morning said, neither it is good to be too poor, nor is it good to be too rich. So there's a missing balance, and that should alarm us. So if we are honest, I think we are doctoring around with the symptoms of the mess with which we in which we need to live. And we personally, also in the discussions we had before in other panels, we say that actually it's not a climate crisis, but it's a crisis of values. We have created this mess. It's not that the climate has a crisis. So let's start with understanding a bit better what well-being is. Napan, what are the core dimensions of well-being in your tradition and also from your experience?
Thank you, and Minister and esteemed participants. I'm not sure, to be honest, that I'm the right person to talk about well-being, because now I'm not well. Kind of after the longest flight in my life and the longest day after that, and the longest name of the session ever from Kushwan. So I need to begin with, bear with me. Bear with me, please. Actually, bear with me, it means despair, and also be patient with us, because we talking about the very important thing, well-being. But also, this is the concept of well-being in Buddhism. What goes around comes around. What we speak, what we think, what we speak, what we act, it come back to us. So, as Minister mentioned about, we need to change our mindset, change our values towards us. And also in Buddhism, when we talk about well-being, it's not just only our health. It's about the planet health as well, environmental. So I think from my experience, when we talk about well-being, it's something that we need to consider the factors inside and outside. For example, today, to be honest, I quite relieved. Even though we started quite late, but I'm honored to listen to Minister. And the most important thing is just my time for speaking is shorter as well. So this is kind of the inner factor that can help you with happiness. And the same situation, if you can adjust your perspective, you feel better, you feel happier. But not just only that, sometimes we fall in the trap that, now we hear everything okay, and we don't try to fix the problem. So that's not okay as well. So in conclusion, for now, I think it's about us to be good friends to each other. This is the very most important concept in Buddhism. Be good friend. So then we listen to good friend, it's why we can change our perspective. And that kind of affect well-being of us and of our planet as well. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Napan. Yeah, you very nicely said that, what you say in a different way it comes back. So already the concept of circularity is there, and you're referring to it. So Mindahi, from the perspective of the First Nations and indigenous peoples, what is the link between well-being, sustainable well-being and holistic well-being and circularity?
Thank you. I just want to share that the concepts about well-being, they are not very well seen in the original nations and traditions, because well-being is based in the dominion and domination of nature, meaning that the GDP and all of those indexes are based in the extraction and accumulation. So we talk more about the good living paradigm. And the good living paradigm is all about to be responsible as a being in this world. But I like to touch about what kind of creatures we are, because the well-being is based in this anthropocentric, egocentric way of thinking, meaning that even science, the Cartesian way of thinking is about dominion and domination. You have success when you compete with others. But, in nature, you collaborate. You live in reciprocity. In original nations thinking is about not taking more than you need. And that's the very reason that we have 80% of biodiversity in the world in original nations' territories. Let's not take it for granted. It's a way of being, it's a way of living, it's a way of acting and feeling and coming together. So it was around more than 7,000 years ago, when we had the most diverse world. We had around 13,000, more than 13,000 cultures. Now we have kind of half of those cultures. And with those cultures, we lost not just biodiversity, but we lost languages. We lost cosmovisions. We lost many ways of seeing the world and how to be responsible and in respect, be respect. Because the kind of how you relate to nature, because nature, we are nature. And we believe that all beings, they have a spirit. It's not that people, like us, just people, human beings, we are the only intelligent ones here in this world. There is intelligence everywhere. Actually, we are not so intelligent because we sign treaties, we sign covenants, and I remember I was in 1992, I was in the Earth Summit here in Rio de Janeiro. I was so excited because I saw how governments, civil society, corporations came together. And that was the first time I saw how governments were worried about the state of the world. Wonderful. And we were marching on the streets with beautiful figures, I remember here in Rio, in the Rio Centro, and we were in the Hotel Gloria with so many people around, and we were very happy because 3 covenants were signed: the CBD, the Commission on Biological Diversity, the desertification, and the climate change. But are we better than in those days? We are not. The good living paradigm is to have access and to take care of waters, the air, the sacred elements of life. But how do we treat water in our constitutions? As a resource, not as a sacred element. And water is a sacred element of life. The air, the earth, and the energies. So when we talk about this paradigm, the well-being is far away, very far away from the good living. The good living is to have access to clean waters, to clean air, to clean soils, to clean energies. Science can support, but science also has an agenda. Even the most informal information is not enough. We need to bring back wisdom. We need to know for what wisdom we can deliver for the future generations. So the circular economy that we are talking about is bringing together other beings. And that's the reason rights of nature and the Earth's jurisprudence is so important at this point. Because the rivers are beings, the mountains, the seas, who we are as humans to give rights if they have existed before us? They have inherent rights. And that's the reason we must go from this linear kind of thinking, this way of thinking that is killing us, is killing ourselves. We are killing ourselves to a more circular way of being. Because if we don't do it, what kind of world we are delivering? And it's not just what kind of world we are delivering, because we are not the ones. We are just another species in the concept of life. We are just another species. We need to be more humble if we want to make it, if we want to transcend. So thinking about circular economy is about thinking in the rhythms of the life and time and space.
Thank you so much, Mindahi. And I would like to connect what you said also about that everything is alive, the rivers, whatever sustains us and the universe. And I would like to ask Dilmohn Singh, from the perspective of timeless spiritual wisdom, how do you understand well-being, and what is the link to circular thinking? I hope you can hear us.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes. Dilmohn Singh, did you hear me?
I can't hear you anymore, sorry.
Sorry, he doesn't hear us. Alisa, can you hear us? So, could you help us to solve the problem? Dilmohn Singh, can you hear us now? Okay. Then I will try to come back to you, and I hope it will work out soon. Mindahi and also Napan, you have been referring to circularity and well-being, and also to the fact that this linear thinking is actually harmful. This is what I understood. And one very influential example of how deeply ingrained we are in linear thinking is GDP, gross domestic product. GDP was, by the way, never meant to measure well-being. Its inventor, Simon Kuznets, said, "The welfare of a nation can scarcely be inferred from a measure of national income." And economic literature vastly agrees that gross national product, gross domestic product, or gross national income are not an adequate measurement of well-being, as market activity is measured without considering the social costs. Yet this model Can you just open your mics, Alisa and Dilmohn? It seems to be that you are muted. If you can say something, that would be helpful. Do you hear us now? I'm very sorry. We are trying our best. And actually, I did not come to hear myself. But I wanted to listen to the colleagues. Okay, we continue. We make the best out of the situation. So, Dilmohn Singh, can you hear us now? Can you please speak? Do you see us? Okay. Dilmohn, if you hear us, you need to unmute your mic and just say something so that we can try to hear you. Okay, we continue. So I wanted to say that the main indicator for development still until today is GDP. And if we watch the news, even if the economy only grows 0.5%, the media is full of negative news. They talk about an economic crisis, they talk about depression, and the frequently called experts in the news, they tell us how bad the situation is. And actually it's quite easy to understand, listening from you, that we are living on one planet with limited resources, and it's impossible to have linear growth all the time. So what do you say about the linkages between linear thinking and the dominant rhetorics in media when it comes to bad news and that the world is not developing, especially in Asia, in Latin America, and other African contexts, that it's not going well because the linear growth is not up to the expectations of the economists? Who wants to go first?
I'd like to continue. Yes, I'd like to continue my sharing. I think we think we are in troubles as human beings because this way of thinking is really causing so much problems. And we always think that we need to go from the me to the we. We think that we need to recover collective dignity as species. And this collective dignity has to do with how we behave in daily life, but also how we honor our ancestors. Because if we really think about the past and honor the past and the mistakes that we have done, then we know who we are. But we also need to honor the future, because the future is what we are delivering. We need to take care about the seeds. And this thinking is about also that we cannot live in the future. No, we can live in the past, but we live in the now. And the now is where we can act, when we can act. So this way of thinking is based in ancestral wisdom, but also contemporary wisdom. Because we need to think about how we can walk in unity. But unity doesn't mean monoculture, or it doesn't mean that just everyone has to think in the same way. Unity means collaboration, to come together, unity in the diversity. Because now we can see that, yes, the intelligence that we have, we can use it to think how economies can go in the regeneration mode. Because we need to remember who we are as creatures, as humans, as a species. Because if we continue in this way, that we think that we are the peak of the creation, but we are not the peak of the creation, we are just another species. We need to be more humble and really to behave. How can we behave? Yes, we can begin with ourselves, but we need to recover families. We need to recover communities. We need to recover countries, and we need to recover our human condition. Then, of course, this way of thinking can change even education, because the kind of education we are receiving at the universities, in the school, is just about to be successful, to get more and extract more, you are more successful. And accumulation. Accumulation even is a sickness. It's not just a mental sickness, but a spiritual sickness. So, what kind of world we want? Because this world is sustaining us. And we call this world Mother Earth. Because without this being, without this planet, we are nothing. And we are the children. And these children are misbehaving. So we need a new economy. An economy that really is sustained by values and by principles that we call the original instructions, the original principles to be. And one of those is reciprocity. Because if you take, you need to give back. If you have a lot, you need to give back. And for what? Because we are not here forever. We are not here forever, just for a while. And then what you are delivering? What kind of children, what kind of seeds you are delivering to this world? It's not just that kind of sustainable development paradigm that is also anthropocentric. Because in that, there is the thinking of intergenerational equity that says what kind of world we are delivering to the next generations. Of course, we think about them, but let's think the other way around. What kind of generation we are delivering to this world? So that's something that we keep in mind, but we are also losing that wisdom. So we need to recover that way of being, thinking, and feeling.
Thank you, Mindahi. Dilmon, what do you say about, from your traditional perspective, about what well-being is, and also what Mindahi was referring to, the sickness actually, which we all carry with us, which alienates us from nature?
Cultivate that inner peace and help us develop that spiritual growth. Once we are in alignment with the wisdom of our inner voice, it motivates us for the well-being of all, which is, again, it's a very fundamental value we carry as a Sikh, and in everywhere around the world, the prayers are being happening. We do prayer every day. It's Sarbat Da Pala, which is the well-being for all. It comes from the spiritual maturity, our inner voice, inner guidance. It motivates us to come out as a selfless service as well. Like it's if I am focused on myself, I will never be able to contribute to the well-being of all. So the spiritual maturity helps me develop a mindset where harmony I develop, where I can live in harmony with nature, like living in accordance with the divine order that governs the universe. The emphasizes it to respect all the creation. Like the sustainable living only comes when we start to respect everything around us. Like this will keep coming back to my mental health. Like if I am more focused in my external growth and the physical expansion, I'll never be able to sort of contribute towards the well-being of all. My focus will be on me. Like as I think Napan said earlier in a way that what comes around goes around. It's like the interconnectedness, the consequences of what I am doing right now, where my focus is, what do I value in my life? If I have a value of my personal, physical and mental well-being, then I will be able to contribute towards the well-being of everybody around me. But I have to focus on myself, stay closer to my inner voice, start understanding the values and the importance by respecting the environment, respecting, supporting each other around us. Like it's kind of balancing the spiritual and material pursuit, I guess.
Thank you, Dilmon. Related to what you said, Dilmon, I want to come to the next subtopic, which is the gross national happiness. That concept was first introduced in 1972 in Bhutan, and in short, GNH does not only measure subjective well-being, but it is a multi-dimensional measurement which takes social responsibility and life satisfaction into account. So it measures living standard, health, education, environment issues, community, but also time use. How is time used by people? And also psychological well-being. You have referred to it, Napan, governance and culture. So do you think this is a model which we could develop at a global scale to say that we move from a linear model, which is absolutely dominating at the moment, to a model where the well-being of nature, animals and humans is put into the focus, and we have certain indices that can really measure this from a holistic perspective. Before I pass it on to you, Dilmon, what do you say about this?
There are a lot of depending factors, I believe, which needs to be considered if we want to sort of take it further to the global level. Maybe cultural diversity would be a big one, I believe. I think different countries have unique cultural values, priorities, definitions, I guess, of well-being as well. So, political will is another one. Like, the commitment from the political parties from all across the world, how do we align that? And then, like, once we have this one, like, there are a lot of, like, it's a big shift away, obviously, from a traditional and economic, like, indicators of the GDP. Like, all the countries will need to agree on common metrics of approach as well. There are factors, I believe, it's strongly believed that it is something we should all look forward to, but this needs to be considered that, again, once we come in alignment with this one single straight path of walking together, its adaptation and its integration as well, like from the whether this will fit in the diverse socio-economical and environmental contexts in different countries. How do we measure and held accountable, like, sort of thing at the end of this? Like, if we want to, like, I strongly believe that if we universally accept the method of measuring the well-being, there should be a mechanism be put in place for the accountability and enforcement of this as well. It's a very, as I said, like, innovative model, I believe, that we should look at, and I think adapting it into binding and holistic well-being index. We have to have a very careful consideration from the cultural and the political factors as well.
Thank you, Dilmon. Obviously, when we want to change something so radically, if I can put it that way, it needs to start, I think, from the very beginning, from childhood onwards. And if you look at our education, our schools, universities, and so on, they are based on linear thinking. The majority, of course, we have exceptions. So the concept of more is better, fast, faster, fastest. Another colleague in the morning also referred to this competition. This dominates economy, but also media. The space travel is based on, as you said, we have only this world, but there are people who think that we can also conquer the moon, we can conquer other planets and so on. The very rhetorics show what kind of relationship we have with these planets. So quite often when we talk about these discourses, people say, oh, this is a left-wing thinking and this is a right-wing thinking and so on. And in circular thinking, actually, it's impossible to be radical because we can either be centered or we are not in the center. We are estranged from the center. Dilmun Singh was referring to the inner voice or the heart. So, what do you say about the statement and what is actually needed in our educational systems to bring out the transformation that is needed so that future generations can move from linear thinking to circular thinking? Because for us who are so deeply ingrained in linear thinking, it's very difficult to change. Napan.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I'll come back to well-being a bit because it's related to linear way of thinking, right? And we can think about the previous generation and this generation. Even now, they have more facilities, more technological equipment, everything. But I don't think they're happier than people in the previous generation. So this kind of I want to share about the well-being. Because in Buddhism, well-being is about how to be happy, how to train yourself, how to practice individual and also provide the social structure that can help us to be happier. So, for example, it's about way of life. Like you can see me, I'm wearing the robe, which came from the 2,500 years ago that the Buddha allowed us to pick up abandoned clothes that people throw away. The Buddha allowed us to pick this and put it together and become this one. So it's kind of circular economy in a way. And I have just only this. And think about how happy I am. I just have this one. I don't need to concern about the code of dress, right? And even I didn't have any robe to change, I didn't take a shower, you cannot notice. Think about that. This is a way of life that kind of reduce obstacle and help us to be happier. But not just only this way, but also social structure. So when you talk about how we're gonna help with the young generation, with the more holistic view, I think we need to start it now. Because GDP, GNH, GPA, always human-made. We created that. And it's the same as echo. And you can hear when the Kushwan talk on the microphone. Echo. And the easy way to stop it is switch it up. That's it. That's a well-being in Buddhism. We learn how to switch it up. If we see something and make us suffer, we try to stop, maybe outside, maybe inside. Don't let for example, right now, maybe someone frustrated with the technological problem. But think about, even we frustrate about that, the problem never been solved because of that. Why are we gonna get frustrated? So in the conclusion, I think we need to start it right now, and I'm happy that you came up with the longest and most useful and powerful session. And this, I take this for your information. Today is my birthday. If I speak and you cannot understand it because of two things, I'm not well, and second, this is my birthday. Forgive me. So this is the. Thank you. So this is the best gift because you part and G20 Forum allow this to happen and invite all of us to think about how damage that linear thinking create to this society. In the past, the Buddha himself, even he was a prince, he was born under the tree, enlightened under the tree, and passed away under the tree. And he passed this way of thinking to many generations. And we still can be happy. Even I have nothing. And you know what? As a Buddhist monk, I cannot even have food myself. I need to rely on what people offer. But I don't feel suffer at all, because like for today, Isna helped me with food, right? And this is kind of the thing that we need to think about. So begin now to change our perspective, and you need to believe that if you can change your mind, and then you can change your communication, your action, even just only one person can create transformation in the world. So like this microphone, you allow me to have this microphone, I have this amplifier. Let amplify the voice for transformation towards holistic development. Thank you.
Thank you, Napan. Actually, we should stop the panel right now because these were so nice ending words. We are, of course, way after the we are really late and we are getting tired, and it's getting more difficult for me to speak in English because it's not my mother tongue. People want to move on, but we want to finish in a positive way. What you said, Napan, if we don't have much, we cannot lose much. So that's a timeless wisdom, right? And you're living it, and we can learn from you. My last question, and please, short answers. I know it's a complex question, but try to provide a short answer. When we look to Indonesia, to Thailand, Mexico, doesn't matter. The young people, they love the Western lifestyle. It's not that they don't want it. It's very popular, the movies are popular, the lifestyle is popular, the music is popular, so everything about that is very popular. So the solution, I think, cannot be like, this is bad, don't do it, and so on, because we see it doesn't work. So something is very attractive about this linear model, it seems to be. So what do you think is the reason for the popularity of this linear model, and what is your concrete recommendation at the end for young people, but also for those who are in political or in business decision-making positions?
I could talk a little bit about that, but I'm going to refer that the linear thinking is threatening life. So maybe consumption and overconsumption fills the gaps, or fills the emptiness that sometimes we feel, especially the young. But I want to refer now what I'm suggesting to the governments, to the institutions, to any policy in the world. So we treat nature in the environmental field and culture in another field. But actually, culture cannot be without nature. So I want to bring the concept of biocultural diversity, biocultural heritage, let's say, even heritage. But not just from the anthropocentric thought, but biocultural diversity must be protected in public policy. Because now we heard the minister, but how the native people, how the citizens, how the cities are suffering from this crisis. And this is the crisis that is in the soul and is in the spirit. So, yes, we need policies. We don't need a fortress conservation, but biocultural diversity conservation. And for that, we need a new curricula, and we need people who think about respecting life and be responsible. Officials, politicians, and anyone, ourselves, because we have also a responsibility to live among our communities. And many communities are being destroyed, like the children, because this imposition through technology, and some people think technology is going to save us. No, technology, it's there for whatever. But it's the consciousness, is how we behave. And lastly, I want to say that this is a big opportunity to bring together our intelligence so we can transcend in a good way. And this time, because elders are saying, this time is not going to be the human agency that is going to change us. This is this being, this Mother Earth, this planet that is going to give us the lessons that we need so we behave. So this is the time, and the time is now, so we can be prepared for what we are already experiencing. It's not good news, but there are so many, how do you call the points of no return? Another way of thinking. But we are resilient. We are going to continue doing as much as we can, and we must come together. Thank you.
Dilmon, final words from your side. What are your recommendations so that we may move on to a more holistic concept of well-being and prosperity?
Contentment and the responsibility as well. I think unless we hold the responsibility, it's very impossible. It's like this forum here. It is really immense pleasure to be part of it. I think we need more of these at the global stages where we can talk and contribute towards the policy and ensure that the development efforts are in harmony and well-being of not only just humans, but the natures and the other cohabitants of this earth as well.
Yeah, because it's 4:30 in the morning. Also, I think for Dilmon, it's a very odd time. And this actually shows the passion they have for the topic we have been discussed, which is, of course, a very non-mainstream topic. And I'm very grateful to everyone also in the context of our IF20 forum here that we are able to also speak about these topics, and you have also referred to it, Napan and Mindahi, and also Dilmon, that we need the space and also to have the courage to go a bit supposedly off topic and really think out of the box. Thank you so much. And Alisa, we hope that we can give you another opportunity to speak. Whenever I come to Indonesia, I don't know how I can compensate for what happened to you today. You can hear us. Thank you at least. I'm very sorry again. Okay, we need to finish. Thank you. I know the time is very late, and you have been very patient. I'm sorry about the technical problems. We tried our best. I thank you, Mindahi. You came from far away. Napan, you came from very far away. And Dilmon and Alisa, thank you so much. It was very enriching, and we hope to have you on a panel soon in person. I wish you a very nice evening, and those who need to take the bus, they can just stay here and we can go together. Thank you very much.